From an anarchist and atheist standpoint, spirituality and mysticism are often viewed with skepticism, if not outright opposition. Both concepts are frequently critiqued for perpetuating hierarchical power structures, undermining rational thought, and diverting energy from the struggle for social and political liberation. This video is a comprehensive critique of spirituality and mysticism through the lens of anarchism and atheism. Spirituality and mysticism often involve deference to spiritual leaders, gurus, or religious authorities who claim special access to hidden knowledge, divine truths, or mystical experiences. These figures typically occupy positions of power within spiritual communities, exercising significant influence over the beliefs and behaviors of their followers. From an anarchist viewpoint, such hierarchical structures are inherently oppressive. Anarchism advocates for the dismantling of all forms of hierarchical authority, whether political, economic, or spiritual. The authority wielded by spiritual leaders, even when cloaked in the language of benevolence or enlightenment, is viewed as a form of domination that undermines individual autonomy and critical thinking. By placing spiritual leaders on a pedestal, spirituality and mysticism can reinforce the very power dynamics that anarchism seeks to abolish. Atheism, grounded in skepticism and a reliance on reason and evidence, often critiques spirituality and mysticism for promoting beliefs that lack empirical support. Mystical experiences, spiritual revelations, and belief in supernatural entities are seen as fundamentally irrational, relying on faith rather than evidence. For anarchists and atheists, the acceptance of irrational beliefs can weaken the intellectual foundations necessary for challenging oppressive systems. When people are encouraged to accept mystical or spiritual explanations without questioning, they may be less likely to critically examine the material conditions of their lives and the power structures that oppress them. This critique is rooted in the belief that reason and evidence are crucial tools in the struggle for liberation, and that spirituality and mysticism can lead people away from these tools. Spirituality and mysticism often focus on personal enlightenment, inner peace, or transcendence, which can divert attention from the material realities of oppression and exploitation. Anarchists argue that these pursuits can lead to a form of escapism and pacification, where individuals prioritize their spiritual well-being over action to address systemic injustices. This can encourage complacency in the face of social injustices, acting as a tool to placate people rather than empowering them to fight back against and overthrow existing power structures. This critique echoes this quote from Mikhail Bakunin that, quote, "People go to church for the same reason they go to the tavern, to stupefy themselves, to forget their misery, to imagine themselves, for a minute anyway, free and happy," end quote, suggesting that spirituality can numb the pain of capitalist society and oppression without addressing its root causes. Anarchists argue that true liberation comes not from inner transcendence, but from the active dismantling of systems of domination and exploitation. This critique is especially sharp from an atheist perspective, where the focus is on the material world and the tangible realities of social and economic life. Spiritual and mystical practices that emphasize personal salvation or otherworldly realms are seen as distractions from the urgent need to address issues like inequality, poverty, and state violence, for example. By turning inward or seeking solace in mystical experiences, individuals may neglect their responsibility to engage in the struggle for a more just and equal society. Anarchism and atheism both emphasize the importance of cooperation and solidarity in the fight against oppression. Spirituality and mysticism, however, can sometimes foster a sense of alienation where the focus is on the personal journey. This alienation, fostered by spirituality and mysticism, is compounded by the belief in supernatural entities or forces which can create a sense of disconnection from the material world and from other people. Instead of working together to change the conditions of our shared existence, individuals may become absorbed in their own spiritual pursuits, reinforcing a sense of isolation and detachment from collective struggles. In the modern world, spirituality and mysticism have often been commodified and co-opted by capitalist interests. Practices like yoga, meditation, mindfulness, or whatever it might be, are frequently marketed as lifestyle products, stripped of any original cultural or philosophical context and sold for profit. For anarchists, this commodification of spirituality and mysticism serves to reinforce capitalist exploitation, turning potentially liberating practices into tools of consumerism. Instead of challenging the capitalist system, commodified spirituality becomes a means of pacification, offering a superficial sense of well-being while leaving the underlying structures of oppression intact. From an atheist perspective, this commodification also underscores the irrationality of these practices, reducing them to mere products to be bought and sold rather than serious philosophical or ethical pursuits. While anarchism and atheism are often critical of spirituality and mysticism, some anarchists have explored the potential for forms of spiritual mystical anarchism that reject hierarchical authority and irrationality. These forms would be non-hierarchical and perhaps rooted in communal practices and possibly focused on fostering a deep sense of solidarity and interconnectedness rather than just individual salvation or otherworldly transcendence. However, from a strictly atheist perspective, even these alternative forms of spirituality and mysticism are likely to be viewed with suspicion. The emphasis on reason, evidence, and the material world leaves little room for practices that involve belief in the supernatural or the mystical. For atheists committed to anarchist principles, the focus would likely remain on building a rational secular society where liberation is achieved through collective action and critical thought rather than through spiritual or mystical means. From an anarchist and atheist viewpoint, spirituality and mysticism are critiqued for perpetuating hierarchical power structures, undermining rational thought, diverting attention from material struggles, reinforcing alienation, and being co-opted by capitalist interests. While there may be some exploration of non-hierarchical forms of spiritual or mystical anarchism, the dominant view is that true liberation requires a commitment to reason, evidence, and collective action in the material world. Spirituality and mysticism, when they promote irrational beliefs or distract from the fight against oppression, are, on the whole, seen as impediments to the struggle for a more just and free society. Thank you for listening, everyone. All the best.